Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing well. Today's a special day because it's the first time I'm working in the new shop. If you guys didn't know, the car is in Chicago with me. Well, here's the shop here. It's a 2-car garage built with really high ceilings. So we've got a 2-car 4-post lift. Anytime we need to work on the cars, we just remove the cars from the bottom, lower the lift, and here we are. We got my car here, and then we got Brandon's K-Swap MRS right behind me. Today, we are installing a Skunk2 Pro-series intake manifold and throttle body, and I also got thermal gaskets to go with them. So let's take a look at what we got and let's get to work. All right, these are the parts I'm installing today. This is the Skunk2 Alpha Series throttle body. It's got a 70mm bore. I also got a thermal gasket to go with it. The intake manifold gasket itself is also thermal. It's basically a polymer material. It'll keep heat soak from happening in the intake and the throttle body, reducing intake air temps, yada, yada, yada. I just like it because it doesn't leave gasket material on the cylinder head or the mating surfaces, so it's really easy to remove and install. This is the intake manifold here. It's the black version, a Pro Series. I ended up going with this because, well, Black Friday, they ran out of the natural finish. And then on the way here, I stopped at O'Reilly's and got a throttle position sensor. So here's the car, back at it again. Last time this thing was out, it was at Gingerman. I had a couple off-road escapades, so it's a little bit dirty, got grass kind of all over the place. But what's really nice is that I don't have any leaks of any kind, which is really good to hear after my first track day. That means I did everything right. So no leaking oil, no leaking fluids, nothing like that. First step today, we are removing the intake manifold. This is still a stock GSR manifold with the secondary butterflies. It's just big, hefty. We're gonna replace it today so that we can get a little bit more top end power, clean up the engine bay a little bit. It'll look really nice by the time we're done. So we'll start off with removing the intake first, then we could start with the electrical connectors, the fuel rail, etc., and then we'll remove the intake manifold. All right, there's one more nut that I need to get on the intake manifold to get it off. It's kind of a pain in the butt to get, so I removed the throttle body just so I can get to it. So just take a second to show you guys an OEM throttle position sensor. You can see it is riveted on. To remove this and put it on a new throttle body, you would actually have to drill it out. But to prevent all that work, I just went ahead and got a new one. This is the map sensor here. It just has 2 small Phillips screwdriver heads on there. So I'll just remove this and transfer it to the new throttle body. But this thing is off right now. You can see inside of it, it's real dirty. And this is way smaller than the new one. Look at that size difference. Hopefully the throttle response will still be okay. But let's continue on removing the intake manifold. All right, this is what it looks like with the throttle body removed. I got one more nut. It's right under here. It's really hard to get with the throttle body in the way, so I had to remove that. But one more down there, and I should be able to pull the intake manifold off from the cylinder head and then get under there and disconnect any vacuum hoses or any coolant hoses that are still attached underneath. All right, I got the intake manifold off. That's what it looks like. It's removed from there. Now it's time to dress up the new intake manifold, transfer all the sensors over, the idler control valve. Then we can mount that back up in there and bolt it down. All right, so we're gonna start off with the throttle body first. We're gonna start transferring the sensors over from the old throttle body to the new one. Typically, you would be transferring the throttle position sensor and the map sensor, but because I picked up a new aftermarket throttle position sensor, we will only have to transfer the map sensor. All right, so the map sensor is installed on top of the throttle body. That's how it'll look right there. Next is the throttle position sensor. If you look, there's a little notch right here, and that actually has to fit within these two teeth right here. And that's how it's gonna determine whether or not you're wide open throttle or the throttle is closed. If you can see, the bolt holes are actually slotted so that you can clock it. And what you have to do when you install throttle position sensors is that you have to calibrate them. When you're idling and the throttle plate is completely closed, the signal wire should be reading 0.5 volts. And once it's wide open, 100%, the signal wire should be reading 4.5 volts. A lot of the sensors on your engine, well, all the sensors in your engine work on a 5-volt power source, whereas motors like the idle air control valve, the injectors, they all work on 12 volts. So I'll put the gasket on here, put the sensor on, and then I'll just tighten her down for now, and the calibration can happen a little bit later. But Skunk 2's kit actually came with 2 brand new screws, so we'll use those. All right, and here is the big chunky intake manifold that came off of this guy right here. This is the factory Integra GSR intake manifold. If you look closely, one thing special about this intake manifold is that it has a set of butterfly valves in here, and it activates via vacuum. It operates just like a wastegate. It opens these valves and it pretty much changes the length of these runners. At low RPM, low load, the runners are nice and long to provide that torque that you need at low end. And at a certain RPM, these valves open up and shortens the length of these runners, allowing air to quickly get in and get into the engine and make the power that you need. But we're eliminating this completely. We're going to go with the Skunk2 Pro-series that you see right over there. What we need to do is just transfer the idle air control valve over to that one, and the intake air temp sensor, which I already taken off because I didn't want it to break during the removal of the intake manifold. So we'll transfer those 2 things, and the intake manifold should be ready to go in. One thing that I also noticed is that I'll have to transfer over the studs for the fuel rail as well. The old intake manifold's down here, so I'll have to take these guys out, transfer them onto here. So I'm going to show you guys how to remove these studs. All you need is 2 nuts that fit on the threads. First, take 1 nut, thread it onto the stud, get it all the way down, about that's good right there. Have enough thread so that you can thread another nut on top, thread that one down too. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a wrench and then a socket, and when you tighten them, they're going to lock together and they're going to lock onto the stud itself. So now this essentially becomes a bolt head. So you can take a wrench and loosen on the bottom nut, and then the whole thing will turn out. All right, I'm at arguably the most time-consuming and pain-in-the-butt part, and that's cleaning off 20-plus-year-old gasket material. So if you can see, I got cylinder number 1, 2, and 3 pretty much cleaned off. There's still some residue here, but I'm planning on hitting it up with my Dremel with a small wire wheel. Doing my best not to damage the mating surface on the cylinder head too badly. And as you can see over here on the 4-cylinder, there's still a bunch of gasket material left, so I gotta scrape that off. And then just a little bit of cleanup around the area here. hit it up with the compressed air, get some brake cleaner in there, clean things out. Alright, so I've got the manifold on the studs here, on the cylinder head. Everything looks pretty good from the start, but if you look, because I have that thick thermal gasket on, these studs barely stick out, so I can't even get a nut on them. I get the bolts through perfectly fine, but those studs don't come out far enough. Alright, so I have an issue. I did not know about this, but when you run the thermal intake gasket, it's actually pretty thick. So now the factory studs are too short, and now I can't finish this install tonight. So I'm on Amazon right now, and it looks like I can order this extended intake manifold stud kit. It's made specifically for this reason. It says right here, this is a must for anyone adding a thermal gasket to their BDHF series engine due to stock stud and screws are too short if you add the thermal gasket and aftermarket intake manifold. That's my problem, and I did not know that, but here we are. I've got Prime on Amazon. This is $9.99 for this kit. 8 left in stock. We're gonna go ahead and order now.
Several days later.
New studs installed. Much better. Alright, for the most part, I'm about 95% done. Manifold is bolted in, the throttle body is bolted to the manifold. I've got all the wiring done, the injectors and the fuel rail is all installed. The last thing is, if you look, the throttle cable doesn't have a bracket. I just ordered a bracket, and I just ordered a new throttle cable as well. This one's kind of long. I don't even know what this is out of. This just came with the car, so this is what I ended up using. We don't necessarily need it right now for the startup because it's just going to idle while I do this. So it's not super important to have this really hooked up right now. In addition to that, the harness is kind of a mess. This is actually an OBD2 engine, and the previous owner kind of hacked up the original OBD2 harness, and it made it work for an OBD1 system. Because of that, there's a lot of extra connectors, a lot of extra just dead weight. I initially was planning to rewire the entire car, build the engine harness from scratch, build all the interior harnesses from scratch, but with the work season coming up and how busy it's going to be, I just don't have time for that. So I will just be picking up a budget Rywire engine harness, the switch panel, and the fuse box, and I'll just be putting it together that way as far as wiring. Kind of ugly now, but it's all going to change. Next step I need to do is calibrate the TPS. After that, I can top off the coolant because I lost a whole bunch while replacing the throttle body and the manifold. Then this thing should be ready for startup. If you look here, we got 3 wires. We got a yellow, red, and a green. Your yellow is your 5-volt positive power. Your red is your signal wire, and your green is your ground. So we'll be tapping into the red wire so that we can get the signal reading in order to calibrate the TPS. The TPS is just a simple variable resistor. Depending on the position of the throttle plate, it's either more or less resistance, and that's how the ECU knows the position of the throttle. What you'll do is you'll use a T-pin or a paper clip, and you'll shove it into the back of the red wire. You'll go through the actual weather seal so that you can touch the terminal itself. But this is so weathered and it's so old that the rubber is actually more like a plastic, so I can't shove a T-pin or a paper clip in there at all. So what I did was I just peeled back a little bit of the insulation layer here so that I exposed some wire, and I'm just going to be touching the positive probe onto here, and then the negative probe is going to go right here onto the battery. Again, like I said, I'm going to be replacing the harness anyway, so this is just to calibrate the TPS.
2,000 years later.
Today we are back in the garage. Yesterday it wasn't the greatest day ever because I just couldn't figure out why the TPS calibration was not working. At first I thought it was going to be the multimeter that was bad because I was getting a reading that was like 1 to 2 volts higher than it should have been. But then we used another voltmeter and it ended up reading the same thing, so it kind of ruled out the tool theory that the tools are bad. It didn't make sense because I was getting over 1.5 volts with the throttle closed and over 6.5 volts with the throttle open. But when we measured the signal wire at the ECU, it read 0.44 volts, exactly what it should have been reading, and then went back to the TPS connector and measured it there again, and then it showed the 0.44 volts as it should have. We were just stumped because we didn't do anything different. All I did was disconnect the D connector and plug it back in. Typically that tells you that there's an issue with wiring, but why were we reading more voltage than the system is supposed to be outputting? So then I put the TPS back into the throttle body, but I couldn't even get it close or in range when it was screwed in. So again, we were stuck. The voltages were a little bit better, but yet we weren't able to still get in that range and be able to screw the TPS in. I don't know what it was. Voltages just kept changing no matter what we did. I just said, screw it, calling it a night. Take some time to think about it. And as I was laying in bed last night, I was thinking, what about this? If you guys remember this, I did a whole video on this. I'll link that up here. This is the perfect opportunity to test out the Bluetooth module because I can actually see throttle percentage. And it's right here. And as I was playing with the different gauges, I found out that I can actually look at throttle voltage as well, and that sparked an idea. So I have this here today, and it's actually hooked up to the ECU right now. The ignition is on. I've used it to try to calibrate the TPS, and it actually worked out exactly how I imagined it would. So I'll show you guys exactly what's going on here. All right, back under the hood here, got the TPS. It is plugged in, and I have the tuner view right here on the intake manifold. I have the TPS throttle percentage right here on the bottom left. When I hit the throttle, it changes. But if you look at the max, I'm fully maxed out, fully wide open throttle, but it's only reading 98%. That just means it's out of calibration. See, even now it's reading 2%, so we have to adjust it. But if you look over here, as I turn this, it's going to change the percentage on the gauge also. You got to move it until it says exactly 0% right on the edge, and then I'll tighten the screws for the TPS down. Alright, so I've adjusted the TPS, and I think it's in the perfect spot, because if you look, this is throttle percentage again. It's got 0 while it's fully closed, exactly what it should be. As I sweep it all the way to wide open throttle, I get an exact 100 reading. Well, it's kind of changing from 100 to 99 and back and forth, but I'll just move the TPS just a smidge. Also look at voltage. The voltage should show 0.5 volt and 4.5 volts. Closed throttle and open throttle. So look at closed throttle, 0.49 volts. Full throttle, 4.5. Exactly what we want. Finally. Got it figured out. Alright, the last step for this video is to fill the cooling system back up. Got some distilled water here. Always use distilled. I got the Lyle funnel here, so we'll add this on top of the radiator, and this should be able to bleed out all the air in the system. Alright guys, moment of truth. I'm excited because this is going to be the first time I'm starting the car with the new Poorman's race dash. So my tablet is set up right here. It's right there. I mean, it's not bolted in or anything, but it's just sitting here on the steering column. Engine coolant temp over here is still blue because it's below a certain limit. Got IAT over here, map sensor, and the throttle position sensor voltage. If you look, it's still 0.49 at closed. Now it's time to start the car, and let's hope these readings come into play. struggling a little bit, it'll pick up. But look at that! Yeah! Look at the RPMs are working. Alright, let's bring this under the hood and let's take a look at what's going on. Alright, so of course the throttle body's a bit loud, there's no intake on it, so you can hear it sucking in air. But look at that. Idling around 800 there. TPS. Let's see here. That's so cool. Alright guys, it's been idling for about 15-20 minutes now. Lower hose is hot, upper hose is hot, both hoses are hot, thermostat has opened up, and if you hear right now the fan is actually running. So we'll go ahead and get this thing capped off and we're good to go. Alright guys, that just about wraps it up for today's video. I got the Skunk2 manifold and throttle body installed. It was kind of a pain in the butt to calibrate the TPS. For whatever reason, the tools I was using to measure voltage just were inconsistent and it just was not working out, but luckily TunerView software came through on my tablet. I was able to see throttle position percentage and also voltage, and I was able to calibrate it that way. And also super excited I was able to actually use the tablet. It responds just like how I want it to. Now I know that my Poorman's race dash is gonna work. But that just about wraps up the video for today. So if you guys like the video, please give it a thumbs up and also share it if you'd like. And if you want to stay up to date with the build, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you guys have any questions or comments, go ahead and put them down in the comment section down below and I'll do my best to answer them. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.